The year is 1815. France stands at a turning point, its fate hanging in the balance after years of war and upheaval. The fields of Waterloo are quiet now, but the echoes of cannon fire and the cries of soldiers still seem to resonate across Europe, haunting the memories of all who witnessed the carnage. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who once redrew the map of the continent and inspired both fear and admiration, has been defeated for the final time. His dreams of empire have crumbled. This wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the end of an era. The world as people knew it was about to change forever. For over a decade, France was the center of a vast empire, built by one extraordinary man's ambition and military genius. Napoleon's armies marched from Spain to Russia, reshaping nations and toppling thrones. But his endless wars exhausted the nation, draining its resources and leaving families in mourning. Across Europe, royal houses trembled at the thought of revolution spreading to their own lands. His defeat left a void in France. What would come next? The people were anxious, uncertain whether peace or more turmoil awaited them. The Napoleonic dream had vanished, leaving France in shock and sorrow. The nation was forced to reckon with the cost of its ambitions. The Congress of Vienna gathered to decide France's fate, aiming to restore stability by bringing back the monarchy. Diplomats from across Europe debated how to prevent another Napoleon from rising. The idea of returning to a monarchy was complex for the French people. Some longed for the order of the past, while others feared losing the freedoms they had fought so hard to gain. Some, especially the old nobility, were overjoyed, dreaming of reclaiming lost lands and privileges. They saw a chance to restore their former glory. But many feared a returning king would strip away their freedoms and return France to the old regime's dark days. The scars of the revolution were still fresh. France was at a crossroads, caught between the memory of monarchy and the legacy of the revolution and Napoleon. The nation's future was uncertain, its identity in flux. The defeat at Waterloo forced France to confront its identity. Was it a land of kings or a nation of citizens? The next 60 years would be a struggle to decide what kind of nation it wanted to be. France would see revolutions, restorations, and new leaders rise and fall. It would be a roller coaster of kings, revolutions, and even another emperor as France sought its footing in a rapidly changing world, forever shaped by the shadow of Napoleon's legacy. With Napoleon exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, far from the heart of Europe, the political landscape of France was dramatically altered. The once mighty emperor was now a distant memory, and the power vacuum he left behind set the stage for a dramatic shift in leadership. The path was now clear for the Bourbon family to return from exile and reclaim the throne, restoring the monarchy that had been swept away by revolution and war. Louis XVIII, the brother of the guillotined King Louis XVI, was chosen to take the throne. He returned to France as a symbol of continuity and legitimacy for the old royal line. Unlike the energetic and charismatic Napoleon, Louis XIII was an older man plagued by gout and ill health. His frail appearance and cautious demeanor stood in stark contrast to the dynamic leadership style of his predecessor. The victorious European powers gathered at the Congress of Vienna hoped that Louis would bring much-needed peace and stability to a continent exhausted by years of conflict. In a shrewd political move, Louis XIII granted the Charter of 1814. This document cleverly preserved many of the reforms introduced during the Napoleonic era. It established a constitutional monarchy with a parliament, guaranteed religious freedom, and protected property rights, including those gained during the revolution. These measures were designed to reassure the influential middle classes and prevent the outbreak of another violent uprising, aiming to create a sense of stability and continuity. However, not everyone was satisfied with this delicate compromise. Many in France remained deeply divided over the future direction of the country. The ultra-royalists, known as the Ultras, were determined to turn back the clock. They sought revenge for the revolution and wanted to restore the old order in its entirety, rejecting any form of reconciliation. To them, Louis XIV's moderate policies seemed far too soft and accommodating, fueling their frustration and opposition. Meanwhile, Bonapartists and Republicans viewed the restored king as an illegitimate ruler, longing for either the return of the empire or the establishment of a true republic. When Louis XIII died in 1824, his brother Charles I ascended the throne, bringing with him a very different vision for France. Charles was a staunch ultra, fully committed to restoring absolute monarchy and undoing the changes of the past decades. He quickly passed laws compensating nobles who had lost their lands and privileges during the revolution, further alienating those who had benefited from the changes. Charles also increased the power and influence of the Catholic Church, making it a central pillar of his regime and reversing many secular reforms. These reactionary actions terrified the middle class and angered Paris's workers, setting the stage for renewed unrest and lighting a fuse for future conflict that would soon engulf France once again. Charles X's reign felt like a step backward. The middle class, who gained wealth and influence since the revolution, felt threatened. Charles X ignored the bankers, factory owners, and lawyers driving France's economy. Meanwhile, life for ordinary workers was getting harder. The Industrial Revolution brought more misery than prosperity for many. Wages were low, working hours long, and living conditions dreadful. The economic downturn of the late 1820s worsened things. Hunger and desperation created a powder keg in Paris. The breaking point came in July 1830 with the July Ordinances. These decrees suspended press freedom and restricted voting rights. For Parisians, this was the final straw. Within hours, the city erupted and barricades went up. Charles then abdicated and fled to England, and the Bourbon monarchy fell again. With Charles X gone, France needed a new leader. The wealthy middle class wanted a leader to protect their interests. They found their man in Louis-Philippe, the Duke of Orleans. He was presented as a new kind of monarch, the citizen king. He called himself King of the French, signaling power from the people. However, the reality of his reign, the July monarchy, was different. It was a victory for the upper middle class, but a disappointment for others. The new constitution expanded voting rights slightly, favoring the wealthy. The government was run by and for a tiny elite. The working classes felt betrayed, trading one king for another with no improvement. The July monarchy became a government of the rich, by the rich, for the rich. The citizen king was really the bourgeois king, creating deep resentments. These resentments would fester for the next 18 years. The 1840s were difficult across Europe, and France was no exception. The Industrial Revolution created immense wealth for factory owners, but trapped workers in poverty. Working conditions were appalling, with long hours and low wages. Families lived in squalid tenements with disease spreading rapidly. Workers had no rights or unions to protect them. This growing misery led to new ideas and protests. Thinkers like Louis Blanc promoted socialism, arguing for government control of industry. These ideas spread quickly among desperate workers. Several uprisings occurred, showing growing anger. A series of bad harvests led to a severe economic crisis. Food prices rose and unemployment soared. The government seemed unable or unwilling to help. This callous indifference convinced many that the system was corrupt. The Hungry 40s set the stage for another revolution. The stage was set for change. By 1848, Paris was electric with tension. The government banned political gatherings, so the opposition held large banquets. These were political rallies demanding reform, especially voting rights. The final banquet was banned, sparking protests. On February 22nd, crowds took to the streets and barricades went up. The National Guard, sympathizing with reform calls, refused to fire on the people. When soldiers fired on a crowd, killing dozens, the situation exploded. Louis-Philippe abdicated and fled to England. The July monarchy was over. Republican and socialist leaders proclaimed the Second Republic. They declared universal male suffrage and abolished slavery. However, the alliance between Republicans and socialists was fragile. This internal conflict would soon tear the new republic apart. The Second Republic was born out of hope, but soon consumed by conflict. The national workshops were a source of tension. By June 1848, over 100,000 unemployed men joined the workshops. The government decided to shut them down, declaring war on the working class. For 3 days, the workers rose in a desperate insurrection, the June Days. The Republicans, led by General Cavaignac, crushed the uprising. Thousands were killed, arrested, or deported. The dream of a social republic was dead. France longed for order and stability. In December 1848, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was elected president. His name was his greatest asset, symbolizing glory and order. He appealed to everyone, promising to restore order and look after the poor. He won by a landslide, becoming France's first president. The moderate Republicans were shocked by the election of a man representing empire. the stage was set for a new chapter in French history. As president, Louis Napoleon was limited to a single term. He launched a coup d'etat on December 2nd, 1851, seizing power. A year later, he declared himself Napoleon III, Emperor of the French. The Second Republic was dead. The Second Empire had begun. The first decade was authoritarian but prosperous. Napoleon III invested in infrastructure, boosting trade and industry. Paris was transformed into a modern city by Baron Haussmann. The city became a symbol of the Second Empire's glamour and power. However, many problems remained. Workers' conditions were harsh and wages were low. His foreign policy was a mix of successes and failures. As the 1860s wore on, his grip on power weakened. He was forced to make his regime more liberal to maintain support. The stage was set for the empire's eventual fall. By the late 1860s, Napoleon III's empire faced mounting and serious challenges, both at home and abroad. The once glittering court in Paris was now overshadowed by uncertainty and unrest. The emperor's health was failing, and his increasingly risky foreign policy adventures had made powerful enemies, both within France and across Europe. Meanwhile, the rising power of Prussia, led by the ambitious Otto von Bismarck, was becoming a direct threat to French dominance on the continent. Bismarck skillfully provoked Napoleon III into a conflict over the Spanish throne, manipulating diplomatic tensions to his advantage. In July 1870, swept up by nationalist fervor and political pressure, France declared war on Prussia, believing victory would restore its prestige. But the Franco-Prussian War quickly turned into a catastrophe for France, exposing deep weaknesses in its military and leadership. The French army was poorly prepared and outdated, while the Prussian forces were modern, well-organized and equipped with superior artillery. The Germans won a series of decisive victories, rapidly advancing and demoralizing the French troops. On September 2nd, 1870, Napoleon III himself was captured at the Battle of Sedan, a humiliating defeat that shocked the nation. The Second Empire collapsed almost overnight, and the Third Republic was declared amid chaos and hope for a new beginning. The war dragged on, with Paris besieged for months, its citizens enduring hunger and hardship before finally being forced to surrender. The peace treaty that followed was harsh and humiliating, fueling a deep desire for revenge and shaping French politics for decades. The fall of Napoleon III marked the definitive end of monarchy and empire in France, closing a dramatic chapter in its history. In just 50 years, France had cycled through monarchy, revolution, and empire, each leaving its mark on the nation's identity. With the birth of the Third Republic, France chose democracy and republican values, a choice that would endure, shaping the country's future for generations.